Let's go.
Let's go. Oh,
Do you want to?
sorry. I'll let you.
Next one.
I'm excited and I feel relaxed and I'm ready to party. Don't say sorry. You don't need to do that. You don't need to apologize. It's a fucked up female habit. You don't need to be sorry for anything ever.
Can you guess what every woman's worst nightmare is?
I don't have rage issues.
I have nothing to prove to you.
When I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where we're all fine, and for the most part, and the podcast where we also love vampires, apparently. I am Lauren Humphreys Brooks, and with me, as always, is Karen. Hello, Karen.
Hello, how are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you, Karen?
I'm doing fine.
Good.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to just say I appreciate everybody who has reached out, either directly to me or through you to check on me and make sure I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm about 30 miles east of where the closest fire currently is. So I'm a good distance away. I'm safe. Hopefully that will continue to be the case because things are shifting. But yeah, it's been an emotionally difficult week, and it's been pretty scary to watch a lot of my friends being affected directly. So yeah. So I'm physically fine. Emotionally, I'm a little drained.
That's completely understandable. Yeah, it's I mean, obviously we're talking about the LA fires, and even just, I mean, I'm the entire way across the country and just watching it and seeing the footage and hearing stories from people who are there, who've had to be evacuated, who are safe but are emotionally scarred. Yeah, it's very frightening and very sad. Like, everything is just, seeing that happen is just really sad. But I'm glad that everybody that I know is safe.
Yeah.
And that, the small mercies, as it were, but that's a good thing, because human life is very important.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's the most important thing. Watching the destruction, the devastation, and knowing what this is going to do to the community, that's part of the emotional toll, but the relief of seeing that on a human level this could have been so much worse. There have been some people that have died for various things, like not getting out in time, or in the case of one person, they think he was trapped and couldn't get out. And so seeing those things happen, it's really, really devastating. But at the same time, when you look at 10 deaths in a city of millions with hundreds, at one point, I think there were over 200,000 people evacuated. It's pretty miraculous.
Yeah. So I think we're all paying attention to and thinking about Los Angeles right now.
Yeah. It's gonna be a long road.
Yeah. So we're gonna talk about a happy movie today. We're gonna talk about a movie that's just like, we're just gonna lift everyone's spirits. We're talking about Nosferatu. The 2024 film from Robert Eggers, and this is one of the first full episodes that we've decided to do on a very recent film. I mean, this came out in Christmas 2024.
Yeah.
But I think that, as anyone who's listened to this podcast for any length of time knows, first of all, we tend to be Robert Eggers fans. I think me maybe a little bit more than you.
It took me a while, but I've come around.
I remember talking about The Witch.
Yeah.
Right. And that you definitely, your opinion on that film shifted over time.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you were saying, which I think is awesome. Actually, mine did too. It started out like, ooh, this is really good, and then became, oh my God, this is great.
Yeah. And for me, it was the first time I saw it, I think it was just mindset, timing, that kind of thing, which really can affect how you consume a film. And so it just didn't work for me the first time I saw it, and then I waited a couple years to watch it again. And when I did, I was just like, oh yeah, I was definitely wrong about this movie.
Well, and the Witch is so it's it's such an there's no other film that's quite like it. None of Eggers' films even, and stylistically, yes, but the use of language and the way that he develops the culture around the family is just, it's difficult. Like when you first enter into it, you're like, I don't know how to process this, basically.
Yeah.
So at that level, Nosferatu is definitely a more accessible film, probably one of his most accessible films, in part because it's a story that many of us know. If you know the Dracula narrative, or if you've seen the original 1922 film by Murnau, or the 1979 film by Herzog, you kind of know the beats that the story is going to go through. And Eggers' film follows the 1922 film pretty closely. There are, in terms of basic plot elements, there are a number of thematic elements and relationship things that he builds on and that he develops out of the Murnau story, and also kind of pulling in more of the actual story of Dracula from the novel. And that's one of the things I want to talk about eventually. But before we get there, just general impressions of this film. When you saw this, what did you think, Karen? Like you're sometimes mixed on Eggers, so like you went into this, what were your feelings about it, just having watched it for the first time?
I would like to first clarify this sometimes mixed on Eggers. So
Okay.
like I said, the first time I saw The Witch, I didn't love it. Watched it again and thought it was amazing. I do not enjoy the Lighthouse. Mostly because I feel so unpleasant watching it. And then The Northman I thought was fantastic. So but the thing about him is, and what I really appreciate about Robert Eggers, is that even if I like going into each of his films, I'm like, you know what? I might not enjoy this, but I know that it's going to be beautiful. I know there are going to be things about it that I will really like. And that's what happened for me with The Lighthouse. But The Witch on second watch and then Northman I thought were great. So going into the Nosferatu, I thought, you know what? I love the 1922 film. I trust Robert Eggers. And at the very least, even if this film doesn't work for me on a story level, I know that it will be beautiful. And so going into it with that mindset was very like, I could just sit and enjoy it and just be immersed in the experience. And I had the fortune to see it the first time in a crowded media screening. And watching this with a crowd is really fun, especially because it is very spooky. But yeah, it's just I was just so mesmerized by how beautiful it is. Even things that are decaying and rotting and gross are so beautiful the way that he shoots them and puts those images on the screen. So yeah, and then just the overall feeling and the way that it plays with death and life and love and misery and all these things. He's just such a smart filmmaker, and he's doing something with horror that other people think they're doing or want to be doing but simply aren't. And he really is just such a master of that craft. And we're so lucky to be living in a time where Robert Eggers is making movies.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think we've both said before that, he's one of the best contemporary filmmakers like working today. Like he really, and like you say, he's doing something that's just remarkable, whether or not it ultimately hits for you. And you mentioned The Lighthouse. The Lighthouse is one that I love, and I also think is not coherent. I do not think that the film works the way that it needs to, but it has so much interesting elements embedded in it that I'm just fascinated by it. And that's like, honestly, even when a film does not completely work or doesn't hit for me in quite the right way, I appreciate it when the filmmaker's like, you know what, I'm actually going to do something really challenging. And even if he fails or she fails at it, it's still fascinating. And I think that's Eggers does not do things by half.
Right.
And it might work for you and it might not, but it's going to be interesting, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I went into this having been told by multiple people, oh, you're gonna love it. All right. So I was already, I think I said this last week, I was already prepped. I was like, okay, I love Nosferatu, I love vampires. I've got a massive Count Orlok tattoo on my forearm. So I'm like, okay, I am excited about this. I'm already excited. I love Robert Eggers. All of his films have just been fascinating to me. I want to see what he does with the Nosferatu story. And then I'm being told, like, oh, you're going to love it. And then you're also at the same time, you're like, I'm terrified that you're not going to love it.
I really thought that you would, but there's always that possibility. And then it's like, I didn't want to build it up too much in your brain that then it becomes a disappointment.
Yeah, well, it was already built up, unfortunately.
I know.
Like, I was like, okay. So I did go into this with the feeling like, okay, I think I'm gonna like this. And I did. Yeah, very, very much so. And I agree with you. It's gorgeous. Like, first of all, it's just beautifully photographed. And it was interesting because there were points where I was like, I'm not certain whether this is working. There were actually moments during the film where I was like, I don't know if I like where he's going with this, etc. And then as it built and as he developed the characters, as he developed the imagery, and the themes and everything, I was like, oh yeah, no, this is going great. And I think that, you remarked on how beautiful he makes these images of decay and death, etc. And that's so much a part of, I think one of the things that we lose in a lot of vampire stories and a lot of Dracula stories is that we lose that kind of grotesque sensuality, I guess is the way to put it. And it's, yeah, in part, I think because filmmakers want to make it more attractive and want to make particularly the figure of the vampire more attractive. So there's a long, long history in Dracula adaptations, right? Stretching back almost like to like post Nosferatu, basically, but like the original Dracula stage play, which is where we get the sort of Bela Lugosi images, the urbane, elegant, attractive vampire who seduces people. And one of the few filmmakers who actually, kind of didn't do that was Murnau, but Murnau kind of went really far in the other direction and made the vampire barely seductive. And one of the things that I think Eggers does incredibly well in this film is to marry that sensuality of death and that death drive with the sexuality of it.
Yeah.
And he does it so well, and it's so grotesque and horrifying, and yet you understand it at the same time. It really is. I said this a couple of times online. This is the Dracula adaptation I have wanted since I was 15. Like, that actually goes into the thematics of the novel, and it's not the plot of the novel. It's very much the plot of Nosferatu. But it goes into the thematics and the spirit of the novel in a way that no other Dracula adaptation has done at all. And it does it in a really alluring and fascinating and grotesque and wonderful way.
I had heard that this was intended to be Eggers' second film after The Witch, and I'm so glad that he waited. Not that he wouldn't have been capable of doing this, 2 films ago, but I think that really taking the time to hone his craft, to put together a committed team of artisans that really understand how to design a film like this, and how to everything from how to light it and photograph it to the costumes, and then also giving himself to really write and explore these themes. I think that that's part of why this all comes together so beautifully, is that he gave himself the time to be ready to do it. And just to your point about the grotesqueness and everything, and how there's this desire to have beautiful vampires and sometimes sparkly vampires, and we don't need to get into all of that, but yeah, I think that there's this innate, I don't know, I don't know if it's a desire or just a feeling like you should give people some reason why they would be attracted to something like this.
Yeah.
And because why would somebody just want to, lie down with death, especially when death is literally decaying and gross. And what I love is that Eggers is just like, humans are weird and we're drawn to really weird things. And it makes sense if you tell it right. And so that's exactly what he does. And so it's like, yeah, from the very beginning with Lily Rose Depp, who gives really just an outstanding performance as Ellen Hutter. And just seeing from the very beginning the way she knows this is terrible, she knows this is wrong and bad for her, and yet she feels it so deeply and she's so attracted to it. It's very easy for us to buy into that. She sells it, he sells it, and it's very easy for us to understand that attraction to something that is so terrible for you, and yet you just can't look away. You can't distance yourself from it. It's inevitable and it's coming.
Yeah, and the vampire throughout like history, even before Dracula, has been this sort of source of terror and of attraction. And that takes different forms. But it is very much this relationship between sex and death, between, that the desire to kind of immolate yourself almost, to like give yourself over to this force, right? That is vile and disgusting at the same time. And it is that, it's very Freudian. It's something that Freud talked about like extensively, but it is something that is embedded in a lot of human society. And that again, Eggers really gets at it. And I'm not saying I love the seductive vampire. Like Frank Langella in I think it's in 1979 Dracula. And honestly, like Herzog goes in this direction as well with his adaptation of Nosferatu. That's the seductive nature of the vampire, even as the vampire is frightening and grotesque. But this one really does lay into that and develops it in such an extraordinary way, that you're repulsed and attracted at the same time. And I think some of that is honestly also just in the beauty of the cinematography itself, outside of Orlok, outside of the vampire elements. The richness of the mise en scène, the way that he uses light and dark, those just everything, that kind of nightmarish quality to the film that just builds it. It's like this compulsion that he creates throughout the film, like way before we're introduced to Orlok as a major character. And that is just, he gets at something elemental, I think, in the story of the vampire and in the human psyche.
Yeah. Well, and another way that he does that is through Ellen. Through
Oh yeah.
I mean, early on, first of all, it opens with this sort of experience that she had when she was younger, where she basically lies down with death, with Orlok, with this thing. But when she's talking to her husband about it before he leaves on this trip, and she's describing this dream that she had, and that it was her wedding and she was marrying death, and she's surrounded by all of her everybody who's close to her, everybody who she cares about, and they're all dead, and it's horrifying. And the way that she's describing this, and then she stops and says, "But I've never been so happy." And then she starts having this kind of weird laugh reaction where you laugh through something that's really uncomfortable and is wrong, but you're laughing about it. Like it's this humorless laughter. And Thomas is listening to her tell this story, and he's just horrified for his wife, and he's just like, what is she talking about? But she knows that what she's describing is something that is coming. It's inevitable. And we as the audience understand that what she's describing is real in a way. And so that helps us when we're going on Thomas's journey with him. That helps us to know, like, we have to have this sense of dread even more than what he's feeling, because we know how how bad this is going to be and how destructive this is going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love, I mean, Thomas's journey, first of all, is gorgeous. There's one image of him at the crossroads that I just want that on a poster.
I do too. Yeah. Yeah.
It's beautiful. Like it was one of those moments in the film where I was just like, oh man, this is cinema, you know, that moment of like, this is what film is capable of.
Yeah. I was telling, I think maybe you, but I was telling somebody that you could take his entire journey from when he leaves Visburg
Yep.
all the way to Orlok's castle. That entire journey, you could take that entire thing, remove it from the film, and just watch it as a short film, and it totally works and would be just such a spectacular short film.
It really would. Yeah, I agree with you. But that like that compulsion that develops, like the closer and closer he gets to Orlok's castle, and that compulsion to like, and that the kind of blurring of the lines between dream and reality, what is actually happening and what is, you know, what is his mind conjuring up. But it's one of those moments where like that whole progress very much makes sense of like why, you know, because one of the big questions whenever you get to a Dracula story is like, why are there no red flags at any point for these characters? Right. Like, why is he like, this is pretty creepy, I don't think I'm gonna do it. And what the film actually develops is that compulsion, that drive towards this horror that is horrible, and that he's attracted to at the same time. The you know, the images of fire and of darkness, and then you begin to get the integration of like Orlok's voice, and this is another element that I think really emphasizes not just the grotesqueness of it, not just the grotesqueness of his appearance, but the seductive nature of his voice. And it's a really creepy ASMR almost thing.
Yeah.
Of like the voice is so distressing. Like every time he spoke, I was like, I don't like this, but also I really like it. And it's that balance that I think Eggers again gets at really, really well. So it's that entire seductive nature of it that throws you off and that makes you feel like I'm uncomfortable, but also I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah. By the way, just because I find these types of bits of information really fascinating, they resurrected a dead language for Orlok for this movie.
Oh wow.
Robert Eggers talked about it. It's too long to get into here, but yeah, he so Eggers was giving an interview and he said, when Count Orlok is doing his spells, he speaks ancient Dacian, which is a dead language, and the Dacians were most likely the people who became the ethnic Romanians in Romania. So, yeah.
Okay, so this is another element that I think we can touch on in terms of talking about Thomas's journey. Eggers is like obsessive about historical accuracy, like to a truly shocking degree. So something like that. But a number of people have talked about that this is one of the few times that the Romani people have actually been represented in an honest, like an actually honest way. Yeah, so in terms of like the representations of their style of dress, language, religion, etc., that this is actually attempting to approximate and to like authentically represent what Transylvania would have been like, what the Romani people would have been like in this time period, even beyond like what Bram Stoker represented. And Bram Stoker was basically using like guidebooks to Eastern Europe to describe the landscape and to describe the people. And so Eggers like has this obsession with getting as close as he possibly can to what would historically have been the truth. And it does, it creates this sense of reality and of also just this, a combination of reality and foreignness of just like, this is so outside of what our experiences of the world. And again, and it's terrifying, but it's also respectful in its own way.
Yeah. It also tells us a lot about Thomas in a very short amount of time as well, because here he is, he's this outsider who's on this journey, and he when he arrives in this little, it's not even a village, when he arrives at this sort of like stopping point, and there are these people there, they're gypsies, he's looking down on them, and it's like, you're the one that's the outsider here, and that just is, and it's not a big, there's not a lot of time spent on it, but that is just another way that we see, Thomas, who is working his way up in his career and his life at home. He does carry with him this attitude, this bougie attitude of looking down on people, even when he's the one that doesn't belong there.
Well, and you get that in that one sequence where he's walking into the inn, right? So it's before he goes to Orlok's castle, and all of these people are like around him. They're dancing, they're singing. And the one man is standing there, and I think he's the leader of the group.
Yeah,
and the one man is standing there, and he looks and he starts laughing. And it's that sense, and we're kind of placed in the position of Thomas, but we also understand like he's entering a space that he doesn't respect and that he doesn't understand.
Right.
And that's, again, one of those elements that carries throughout the entire film, of like this idea of we have to have a rational, logical, scientific explanation for everything. And what gets reiterated generally in vampire stories, but particularly in this one, is this is death. You've literally invited death here. This is not a force that you can reason with or that you can explain. You cannot establish this is how there's even the sense of like, you can't even really fight it. You have to embrace it at some level, right?
It is inevitable.
And that's what's so horrifying about it. But it's this attempt throughout the film, like, we're going to stave it off with logic and rationality and science, etc. It's like, you can't.
Right.
And that, is such a powerful element, I think, throughout the entire film. So here's one of the things that often gets talked about when it comes to Eggers's work, which is that a lot of his work is very feminist.
Yes.
And so would we say that Nosferatu is a feminist film, Karen?
Yes. Yes, I would.
Elaborate.
Well, the thing is that, and I think that we have some additional comparisons we can make to Murnau's film.
Yeah, definitely.
In fact, I'm kind of glancing over the notes that you had put up too, and it was some of the things I was already thinking about as well. I think both of us rewatched that film this week, in prep too, and it had been a while since I had seen it. I've obviously seen it before, but it had been a good long time, and so I had forgotten some of the specifics to it, or certainly how they compare to Eggers' version. And I think one of the biggest differences between the two is Ellen, and how much she is directly involved in the plot and how much she gets to decide what happens. And so where I feel like this becomes truly a feminist film, I think there's a few things, but I think one of them is simply that so much of what happens to Ellen, she gets to decide. It's up to her. I mean, she's living in this world where women don't have a lot of power. They don't have, a lot of rights. But and so her ability to navigate this world and to exist in it is limited by the men around her. But yet she, and sorry, I'm kind of going all over the place. I'll come back around to that. But yeah, I think ultimately she gets to have more autonomy. She's drawn to death, but she is the one who decides to embrace it and to accept this fate. It doesn't happen against her will. And I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, and there's throughout the film, and I've only seen this film once, and I really wish I had been able to go see it a second time before we talked about this. But throughout the film, there's this emphasis on, the female complaints of the time period. So hysteria, there's talk about, like, she has to wear, she should continue to wear her corset because it like holds her together, basically. There are all of these elements that are like the very masculine mainstream, scientific understanding, like this is the way that women are, right? As a way of explaining the psychological elements of what is going on with her, and the reality of it is that she has called to death. Basically, death is coming for her. It's coming for all of them, but it's coming across land and sea. It is attracted to her. It is seducing.
It's coming at her invitation too.
Yeah, exactly. And that, like you say, she's not a passive character, where she is very much in the Murnau film. And she's a passive character who then sacrifices herself for the good of everyone else. But there's a lot more going on in Eggers' film.
Yeah.
In terms of her characterization. And then there's also this element of like Thomas signing her away. And they actually have a conflict about this. They have an argument about it, which she says to him, like, you sold me to him, right? You signed me away. You signed over your rights to me to Orlok. And we see that happen. And it's, and Orlok is kind of, he's fudging it, obviously, but it is all about this like middle class sensibility of like, this mainstream middle class attitude of like the man owns the woman, and he can sign her away, and he could sign her away to death.
You're right. But what I think is so interesting about that, and what Eggers decides to do, is that is not a binding contract. Death uses that fact, like he goes to Ellen and says, your husband did this, and it's not, well, now too bad for you. He's basically using that to convince her of why she should accept it, not that, well, this is out of your control. She still gets to make that decision.
Yeah, and he says to her, it's just like, there's this whole thing about she has to go to him willingly.
Right.
And again, it's that, it's using those elements of the vampire, right? The idea that the vampire has to be invited in. Mm-hmm. You can't, the vampire can't just show up and consume you. The vampire has to be invited into your space. Yeah. And it's using that and making it, emphasizing the psychological and the emotional elements of that, of being like, you have to let me in order for me to have any power. And that's overused specifically. And that's exactly what kind of Orlok is developing. So yeah, you're right. Thomas can't invite Orlok for Ellen. Ellen has to invite Orlok. I do have to say, I was skeptical about Lily Rose Depp. I haven't really seen her in much, but I know that I believe Anya Taylor-Joy was originally cast to play Ellen, and then because of scheduling and change and things like that, like she wasn't able to do it. I was
sorry, I just wanted to jump in really quickly on the Anya Taylor-Joy thing. I'm so glad this wasn't her. I think she is a talented actress. I do. But I think that she just has this cold detachment that wouldn't have worked for this character.
Yeah, I was, like I say, I was surprised in a lot of ways. Like I didn't know quite what to expect. And I was a little bit like, oh, okay, so like we'll see how she does and everything. She was fantastic. Lily Rose Depp was fantastic. Mm-hmm. And yeah, she does have a sort of, she isn't cold. She definitely has a warmth. She has a reality to her. Like she's not separated. I bought the desperation and the desire, that combination that is very much a part of her character, that she wants to save her husband and her friends, and she also has this other facet to her that desperately wants to unite with this grotesque monster. Mm-hmm. And I believed it. I believed it all the way throughout. I think that worked really, really well. And I was, yeah, I admit I was quite surprised by that. I was more prepared to be on the fence about her, and I like, no, she did a fantastic job.
Yeah. Yeah, she's very talented. I haven't really seen her in much either, and this is like, okay, I hope that this opens some really fun, exciting new doors for her.
Yeah. I also have to say that Bill Skarsgård is like totally unrecognizable. Every
Yeah, when I
time
see these articles of like this person's unrecognizable in this role, and then it looks exactly like them, I get so annoyed. This is actually unrecognizable.
well, I think the majority of it was prosthetics too. Like he's basically
Yeah.
buried in prosthetics.
Mhm.
But also every time I see an interview with like the cast, it's like, oh, it's Bill Skarsgård. Look at him. It's just like, who does he play? He's just like the character design of Orlok in this film. This is something else I really liked, and maybe we can get into talking a little bit more about the Murnau film as well. The character design of Orlok very much recalls, to a certain degree, the design of the Nosferatu of Orlok in Murnau's film, but it is very much not the same image. To be honest, I expected it to just basically be that, like for them to just redo the Orlok image from the 1922 film, and they didn't at all. In fact, they drew in the use of the mustache and the sort of that walking corpse element that is, he's decaying. He's, even as he gets stronger, he is not turning into this beautiful man. He's still this decaying kind of twisted corpse.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, I was pleased by the mustache entirely because that's an element of Dracula that almost never gets used. Even, they use a little bit in Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, which we're not going to talk about. I hate that movie so much. But that mustache, like the really heaviness of it and the kind of sensuality of it, that is 100% Dracula. That is from Bram Stoker, and I loved it.
Yeah. Well, and just with Bill Skarsgård in general, and how, like, if I went into this not knowing who it was, I never in a million years would have guessed who it was. And there's, with some filmmakers, that leads to a character that could be very interchangeable. It almost doesn't matter. The prosthetics take on a life of their own. That voice takes on a life of its own. And you could swap out any actor, and it doesn't really fundamentally change the film. I think Bill Skarsgård specifically, we've seen him play some terrifying characters, and some to a funny degree, some not so much. But I think that he does bring with him this allure and a menace that he's one of the few people that can really capture it that way. And he does such an outstanding job. It's this whole movie top to bottom has just really great performances, and I think that that's credit to the actors and credit to their director, who's able to work within their skills and really bring that to life. And I think Skarsgård is he's so surprising in his talents. And I feel like there is no limit to how terrifying that man can be. And yet it's hilarious because if you watch him in any interview, he seems like the most mild-mannered sweetheart of a person. And it's just like, where's that hiding?
I saw some interview with him, and I think it was Nicholas Hoult who plays Thomas, and Skarsgård was talking about how isolating it was to be in all of those prosthetics, because it's a lot, like it was essentially like you're buried under, you're separated from everyone else, you're buried under all of these prosthetics, and him and Hoult actually like kind of bonded over that, because Hoult has been in roles where he's had to be buried under prosthetics as well. And then they were like, so they kind of reached out to each other. It's like, are you okay? Are you doing all right? You need some water.
Oh.
So I thought that was really sweet. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had something else to say about the Nosferatu design, and now I can't remember what it was. But so one of the things that I really like about this film is that it is very deeply in dialogue with Murnau's film. probably more so. You could probably make an argument for Herzog's as well, but it's very much in dialogue with Murnau's. There's a lot of references, the use of shadows, the use of expressionist acting and techniques, etc. But what I really liked about it is that it is not just this, we're now going to do expressionism in 2024. It's its own thing. It makes reference to Murnau. It holds on to a lot of the elements of the original film and is also a completely independent work. And I really like that kind of push and pull. I like the fact that it's not just referential. It's not just, for those of us who are fans of the original film, it's not just like, oh, it's the shadow image and everything like that. It does something fascinating with the original text. And that to me is one of the best things you could possibly do with a remake, is to take the original text and then to develop it in a different way. And that's what this film does. And I really was impressed by that all the way through.
Yeah, and that's what makes Robert Eggers such a gift of a filmmaker in this day and age. We have a few that are working. We have some that are just really popular and kind of give the people what they want. And that's fine. Be a fan of whoever you want to, but like, for those of us who really truly appreciate film as art and as this entire form, you have to look at filmmakers like Robert Eggers, like Taika Waititi, even like Bong Joon-ho, like some of these others that are working in a different way, and that they understand especially when they're adapting something. They're taking something that has already existed and they're giving new life to it. They're presenting it in a new way, and they have this understanding of the material itself and of the things that make, like, clearly Eggers understands Murnau's film in a way that a lot of people don't, and he's able to use the ideas of it, not to replicate, not to give us these Easter egg callbacks to the Murnau film, but to inform what he's trying to tell us, the parts of the story that he thinks are important. And understanding Murnau's film, plus Stoker's novel, plus just vampire lore in general, plus just the art of modern filmmaking, all those things, he's able to use that to give us something that is new and different. And that's part of why he's so exciting as a filmmaker to watch, is because he takes things that we know and he gives us something that we didn't even know we wanted.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it, I think. And to take this story that is so old too. I mean, so you've got a film that was made in 1922 based on a book that was written in the 1890s. And is a story that has kind of threaded its way through the 20th and the 21st century, that has existed in all kinds of different forms and all kinds of abilities. I was saying earlier that this was the adaptation of Dracula that I've wanted since I was 15. One of the problems with vampires is that vampires have become almost a cultural joke. Because the image, particularly the Lugosi image of the kind of urbane vampire, it's been like, okay, so and then we get things like Twilight, we get things like Vampire Diaries, True Blood, all of those things. And after a while, it's just like, okay, well, we've done all of it, haven't we? Like we've gone through, we get the Anne Rice stories, et cetera, but we've done everything. And there's something about Eggers then being like, okay, we're going to go all the way back. We're going to go all the way back to the beginning of the vampire mythos. And I'm not just talking about like Dracula. I'm talking about beyond that, way back into the origins of Dracula, the things that Stoker was using, the mythology and the folk tales, et cetera. And we're going to keep on stretching back into these elemental parts of the vampire story, and the stories of demons and the occult and dealing with the devil and all of those things. And it is this brilliant use of folk horror that then kind of drags us all the way back into the 21st century. And there's a connectivity there that I think is just it's brilliant, and it brings out the fact that the vampire doesn't have to be a joke. This isn't just a cultural image that has kind of been played out. This is something that still has resonance for us, and is still something that, you know, there's more to be said about it.
Yeah. Well, and using, I think the other thing, because so many vampire stories are about the vampire. And in this case, Eggers makes the story where the vampire is a type for death. And it's this constant looming presence. It's not just about this being, this entity, this person. It's so much of what he represents. And that's something that we, you know, like he's creeping toward them, you know, there's this shadow coming. Images like when the plague ship shows up and the entire town is covered in rats, you know, and people are getting the plague everywhere. And then there's even this scene that, with a different filmmaker, I think it could have looked so cheesy, but the way that it's filmed looks amazing. And that is when Orlok has arrived in is it Visburg? Is that the right? Am I saying that right?
I think so, yeah.
When he's there, he's in his castle, kind of separated from the city, but looming over it. And he's standing at the window and he reaches out his hand and you see the shadow crossing over the city toward Ellen. And as that shadow is crossing, you can hear people down below that are in its path that are screaming in terror. And it's this visual representation of this nightmare that has arrived in their city, and so many people are clueless about what it really is, or how it's going to affect them, or how it could affect them. And there's something very universal about that, because we're living in a time where we're surrounded by nightmares and lots of terrible things are happening, and there's this threat, and it's easy to try to focus it on a villain, but that's not it. That's not the answer. There's so much more. And those threats are so much more widespread than just being limited to a person or an entity.
Yeah, that evocation of the power of Orlok, the power of death and the power of despair, throughout the film, particularly the second half of the film, is so intense and evocative and real. It's like, why is this happening? Well, because it is, you know, because, and it's horrifying, but it's, you know, it's funny though, because going into this film, I was like, oh, this is really going to be depressing. And I wasn't depressed at all. I didn't come out feeling bad, particularly. I was like, this is amazing, you know? And the other thing I have to say about that shadow image, I think, and someone could correct me on this because it's been a while since I've seen the film, I think that it's actually a reference to Murnau's Faust, where there's a similar image of Mephistopheles spreading his wings over the town and bringing the plague. I believe so. I would have to watch the film again, but that was one of the things that leapt to my mind when because it's a very expressionist image. So I think that that's actually, you know, and again, it's that comparison between Orlok and the demon, the creature that you make a deal with at some level. But yeah, it's so evocative and so frightening, and this, you know, it's that wonderful element of expressionism that is, you know, we're kind of going to make the psychological external.
Yeah,
we're going to show you how you feel, basically.
But I think it also accomplishes something that they couldn't have done in a silent film, because you really do, you hear these screams, you hear, you know, you and because you can hear that, you feel that growing sense of dread and despair that the town is feeling. People who have nothing to do with what's happening are affected by it.
Yeah, it's the arrival of the plague. Why is the plague here? Because it is, you know.
Right, exactly.
So let's see, is there since we're talking about the full film, why don't we talk about the ending?
Okay.
Because so effectively, if anyone has not seen the original 1922 Nosferatu, skip this, because this is actually pretty much what happens in the original film as well, plot wise. Not so much in some of the relationships to the characters. But so essentially what we get is that it ultimately comes to pass that Ellen is going to have to sacrifice herself. It needs to make a choice to sort of unite with Orlok, to accept Orlok, and to die, right, in order to save everyone. And so she's an interesting figure because there is almost this element of the female Christ coming out of like, you have to sacrifice yourself up to this horror that you also desire at the same time, because that's part of the story.
That she also invited. That's the thing. She basically has to close the door that she opened.
And that, speaking of the grotesqueness of the ending, you've got this sexuality, you've got this, the comparison between the vampire and the corpse and the lover, and all of this is kind of coming together in this final sequence where Ellen is having sex with death, right? And that final shot is like, it's, again, it's one of those points where this film almost skirts the edge of humor. Like, there are points where I was like, there's almost a compulsion to laugh and to giggle at some of the images, but it's so horrifying at the same time, and beautiful. And it's like this smushing together of all of these elements that I'm like, I don't know how I feel right now. So the ending, the final shot of like, Orlok's body on top of Ellen's, and this like, horrificness of it, of this twisted corpse, basically, as the sun is rising and the cock is crowing and everything is, maybe going to get better. It's fascinating. I keep saying that, but it is fascinating.
Yeah, it is. Well, and just what's happening in that scene is they're having sex, and the sun comes up and he sees that. He looks and he sees that the sun is rising. He knows that his time is done. He needs to get back to his unhallowed earth. And she tells him to stay. And so he stays. And so it's this moment where the two of them sort of, like, he knows what the consequences are going to be, but the two of them are just locked in this embrace. And so then, that final image where this ultimately has killed both of them, it's horrifying, and it's beautiful, and it's grotesque, and it's so satisfying. I don't know why it is, but it is.
So it's one of those. So I'm like, I'm gonna have to study this and then think about it for
study myself.
Exactly. Well, and I think that's, I've said this about vampire stories before, that vampire stories really do draw out some of these basic psychological elements of humanity. You kind of go like, that's not, I don't know if I really want to look at that too closely. But they do, and I think that this film absolutely like falls into that. It's not only not resisting these elements, but it's like very much leaning into the elements. I do have to say, I forgot to mention this. You mentioned earlier that this is a film that's much more about the people and not the vampire. Again, very in keeping with the actual story of Dracula. Dracula is not there in the novel, like as a character, for very long. Most of the book is focused on the people who are fighting Dracula. But he is this force that kind of looms over everything. And that's the whole point of the vampire, is he's this force of nature, element of death that is kind of manipulating everything. He's there, but he's not actually present. And I think that that's something that this film does really well. So anything else you wanted to talk about, Karen?
I just wanted to also briefly mention how much I enjoy all of the other characters as well. This is such a well constructed cast. Just really fascinating people, Willem Dafoe, first of all. You can't talk about this movie without talking about how that man is just in his element, having the time of his life. He is so much fun to watch. And God,
we needed it. Like, he gives a little bit of humor, and just like,
the right amount. Yeah. And then but also like Simon McBurney as Herr Knox.
Mhm.
He's so good too. And like that character exists in the Murnau film, and yet it just feels, I don't know, McBurney, the way that he plays it there are times where it's kind of it's like, oh, who is this goofy weirdo, you know? But also you really see the danger of people who line up for something and they do not know what they're signing up for. He's part of why Orlok is able to do what he does, and Canuck has um aligned himself with the darkness in a much different way than Ellen has. Um and just watching the way that that drives him insane, and he just it's that's another really really great performance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Aaron Taylor Johnson, who plays Harding.
I've spent the last year trying to figure out exactly when it was that he became hot to me.
He's very good, and again, you know, in a lot of ways, a very thankless role because he sort of
Yeah.
just stayed. You know, he's like, no, this is the way the world works, and he doesn't want to accept the fact that no, there's a vampire.
Right. Right.
But
Because why
he,
would he?
well, yeah, exactly. I mean, honestly, like he is all of us, really. We'd be
Mhm.
like, no, that's crazy. That's crazy because it is.
Yeah. Yeah. It totally makes sense. Yeah.
And I think it's Emma Corrin
Uh-huh.
who plays his Anne, his wife, and again, so tragic. Like her as like her characterization. There's a lot of tragedy in this film,
There
um,
is.
but her characterization, she's so tragic and just very much a victim of the forces that are persisting around her.
Yeah. Well, and actually that's something else that I had thought about earlier when we were talking about the way that that this really this entire film addresses the way women are treated and the way women are part of society. And I think that the fact that Anna and Friedrich have two girls, I think that
Mm-hmm.
that matters, especially because these two girls are terrified every night to go to bed. They're, you know, they don't want to go, they're crying, and they're so afraid of this monster in their closet, which, you know, that's such a common kid thing, and yet they literally are in the middle of the night killed by the monster. And that it's so heartbreaking and tragic and terrifying to see that, and for Anna to have to come in and see her girls that way. But it's also just that, you know, listen to listen to women. You know, it's just another element of these kids, these children are so dismissed when they on some level understand that there is a real danger.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fantastic film. I keep saying
So
fantastic.
good.
I keep saying fantastic, and I realize that I repeated that probably 100 times during this recording.
That's okay.
But
That
it
is
is,
okay.
it's brilliant. It really is brilliant, and I want to see it again. And probably if I were to see it again, we could do a whole other episode where the two of us just like keep on watching this movie and are like, and then let's talk
Yeah.
about this that we missed in the last episode.
You know, I'd be okay with that. Maybe like 3 months from now, we'll revisit. We'll do a bonus episode, and we'll revisit and just talk about all the things we didn't talk about the first time.
I think that we should, because yeah, there's it was interesting going into this because I didn't entirely know like how close was this going to follow the original film, what was it going to do with it? And interestingly, like now that I know that it is like that the plot itself is Murnau's film, in a lot of ways that kind of frees you up so to then start really paying attention to what happens with the characters, how the different characterizations are developed, the themes of it, etc., and the imagery, all of that kind of gives you leave then to kind of ignore the plot almost and just begin delving into kind of the deeper elements of the film.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say, as much as I loved it the first time, I was fortunate enough to get to see it again this week. And I'm so glad that I did, because it's even better the second time. And yeah, that image of Thomas at the crossroads, I want that on my wall. Like
Yeah.
that's just such a beautiful image. And then there's just so many pieces like that, so many elements like that. And then just getting to really enjoy these characters and the story, and And there's just so much to find upon each viewing. And I can't wait to watch this again and to be able to watch it in my house and pause it and just like study, we hear people say this sometimes, but this is a film where every image could be its own separate painting. It's just, there's so much to see and so much to enjoy about it.
Yes, I think that is a good place to end this. You are absolutely right, Karen. So yeah, I think that's going to close us out for this week. Nosferatu is right now in cinemas. Go see it in a movie theater if you can. It does, I'm always back and forth about that, but this is something that I think seeing it on a big screen and getting to really immerse yourself in those images, particularly if it just means that you're going to turn off your cell phone.
Yeah.
Being able to immerse yourself in the story and in the film is, I think you're really going to come out with a beautiful experience.
By the way, speaking of that, I just wanted to just mention, and I don't get all excited about box office like, we don't get excited about box office like other people do. But this film was number 3 this weekend. Like this past weekend. Wow. It was number 3. And that's huge. Like, that's so exciting. And when I saw it again on, I think it was Wednesday night, it was a fairly full theater for a middle of the week screening. It's exciting to see that people are embracing this movie. It's made over $100 million worldwide.
That's fantastic for a film that is not a superhero movie or is not this big budget whatever. It's great.
Yeah, for sort of this niche filmmaker that isn't a household name outside of the industry yet, and to be doing that kind of business and with a film that is so full of symbolism and this is really art in a way that a lot of other modern films aren't. And to see people embracing that and getting excited about it, it's great. And it's only been out for 3 weeks,
Yeah. So if you have not seen it, go see it. If you've not seen the original Murnau film, definitely watch that. Kino has a beautiful Blu-ray of that now. And that's a very different experience, but just as weird and terrifying in its own way. And so, and we will be back next week. We are going to be talking about A Face in the Crowd, starring Andy Griffith. And this definitely does not have any resonance whatsoever with some of the things that are happening this month in politics.
For sure. Definitely not. Totally unrelated.
If you know A Face in the Crowd, you know that what I'm talking about, which is that it doesn't have any resonance whatsoever. So if you have not seen A Face in the Crowd, definitely watch it. It is, first of all, it's a great film. And it's frighteningly prescient. And of course, we want to thank our wonderful patrons who include Abby, Audra, Brian, Connor, Estefania, Ferdinand, Heather, Holly, James, Judy, Carriata, Matt, Michelle, Monty, Nanina, Noel, Robert, Steve, and Sharon. And thank you guys so much for continuing to support us. And we do have a poll up on our Patreon for what our next bonus series is going to be. We've got a couple of different options, and I think that you can also write in and offer an alternative. I love all of the options that we have up there. I'm excited about any of them. So, have at it. Like, tell us what you want to hear.
Yeah.
That's patreon.com/Citizen Dame. And you can also contribute to our Ko-Fi. That's ko-fi.com/Citizen Dame. And of course, we have our website, citizendamepod.com, where Karen has been working really hard to get things up. And I've been a real slacker on that one. But she has some interesting stuff up there right now. So I'm just stumbling over my words. And of course, you can get in touch with us via email, citizendamepod@gmail.com. And we are also on the various socials. We are on Instagram and Blue Sky at Citizen Dame Pod, and we are a Letterboxd HQ at Citizen Dame. And of course, you can get in touch with us individually. Karen, where are you?
I am on Instagram, Letterboxd, and Blue Sky at Karen M. Peterson.
And I am on Instagram and Letterboxd at LH Business. So that will close us out for this week, and we will talk to y'all later.
Aye.
During the most irregular dreams, I fear I'm taken ill.
It is a black omen to journey in poor health. You will remain and well rest yourself.
I must object, my lord.
You will obey this my counsel.
But, my lord... Count?